SideQuest is a product of Colin's Last Stand, an eclectic collection of podcasts and video series supported by fans on Patreon at patreon.com/colinslaststand. If you want to support the show, as well as gain some cool perks, consider pledging a monthly amount that makes the most sense for you. Your support not only helps SideQuest continue into the future, but also supports the production of Sacred Symbols, the all-new PlayStation podcast, Knockback, the retro-themed podcast, and Fireside Chats, the interview series, all under the CLS umbrella. Supporting Colin's Last Stand on Patreon can grant you early, ad-free access to all of the podcasts, exclusive shows, the ability to vote on show topics, and much more. But most importantly, it allows this brand of totally independent content to thrive. Thank you for your love, kindness, and support. I truly appreciate it. Now, on to the show. Every once in a while, you're given a stark reminder of how much time flies. And when I received a PSN code for Guacamelee 2 in the weeks leading up to its release, I was provided such a shock to the system. It was more than 5 years ago that the original Guacamelee launched on PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita, and in that time, the Metroidvania subgenre has gone from an ill-populated niche to something far more robust and mainstream. Indeed, we're swimming in Metroidvanias here in 2018. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But the original Guacamelee brought something special to the genre, something worthwhile for fans desperate to relive a portion of those Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid glory days. It had a fresh, Mexican-inspired aesthetic, a fluid combat system inspired by classic brawlers, and an irreverence desperately needed in games of its type. Canadian development team DrinkBox Studios delivered what was easily the best game in its tiny repertoire, and one of the most memorable Metroidvanias ever created. But the calendar kept flipping. DrinkBox worked hard on upgrading and porting its marquee game for audiences outside of the PlayStation ecosystem, and it even released what was, at its launch in 2016, a Vita-exclusive RPG called Severed that looked a great deal like Guacamelee, but otherwise had nothing to do with it. But what I really wanted was more Guacamelee, and after a half a decade of waiting, a sequel has finally arrived. Playing it awoke in me a weird sort of muscle memory born out of my extensive play of the first. I platinumed it on PS3 and Vita, and again on PS4 a year or so later. Guacamelee 2 is pleasant in its familiarity, incredibly fun to play, funny in its delivery, and just like the original, perhaps a bit too short. But before I go further, I should note that I'm friends with members of DrinkBox, and my name appears in the thank you section of Guacamelee 2's credits. So while I'm fully confident that my review is objective and unbiased, it's ultimately up to you whether you take what I say with a grain of salt or not. The original Guacamelee revolved around a quiet and unassuming agave farmer named Juan. Juan is killed at the beginning of the original game after a confrontation with an otherworldly presence, only to be revived as a luchador with intense, dimension-traveling wrestling powers. The original game ended on a high note, with Juan reunited with the love of his life, and Guacamelee 2 begins 7 years after these lovebirds' reunion. Juan is married now and living a simple life, raising some children, tending to his farm, and stacking on the pounds as he grows older and more comfortable. But a new threat appears on the scene, and it's incumbent on Juan to tap back into his dormant powers, this time in the name of saving the so-called Mexiverse, a series of parallel dimensions that exist atop one another, not all unlike the original. First off, if you're new to Guacamelee and you're jumping into the sequel, I recommend you don't. The first game is absolutely worth your time, and only by playing it will you truly appreciate the many nods to the original and its successor. Settings, characters, enemies, and even graphical and audio assets ground the sequel very much in the same world as its predecessor, and while it might come off as redundant to some, I feel like it added yet another layer of familiarity to sit next to how familiar the game feels when you play it. DrinkBox absolutely nailed Guacamelee 2's look, and indeed, it's stunning how much cleverness and detail rests in every corner, on every screen, in every area of the game's expansive, non-linear map. Guacamelee 2 moves fast, but it's when you opt to stop and smell the roses, as it were, that you truly come to appreciate just how lush, vibrant, and lovely your surroundings are. Guacamelee 2's writing is also stunningly on point and often laugh-out-loud funny. The original was humorous, but the sequel goes even further with its comedy. It can't be understated how rare it is to encounter a game that actually makes you chuckle while you're playing, and it's even rarer for humor to be conveyed in what is in essence a 2D side-scroller with nary a peep of voice acting. With only text and some cute graphical flair, Guacamelee 2 roots players in an inherently upside-down and wacky world, and the entire adventure is far stronger because of it. If either Guacamelee game took themselves seriously, much of their charm would be totally lost. Likewise, the devs at DrinkBox Studios are fully aware of what inspired them to make this game, and to play games generally, and they place these references on Guacamelee 2's sleeve. The entire game begins with the previous game's last boss battle, a not-so-subtle ode to Guacamelee 2's major influence, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, complete with dialogue similarities. And while the game does get far too referential at times, to the point of bogging down some discussions or otherwise zany moments, I love the attention paid to the games of yore, not only from within the Metroidvania genre, but certainly from outside of it as well. Like the original, I was especially fond of the roster of boss enemies in the game, and the NPCs that accompanied them too. No one takes themselves seriously, everyone is funny, it's awesome. But in reality, the true joy of Guacamelee 2 isn't looking at it or reading its dialogue or listening to its catchy soundtrack. It's in playing it that you're bound to fall in love all over again. It's stunning how simple yet comprehensive Guacamelee 2's gameplay is, and how well designed the entire combat system is, from the most basic punch attacks to the deepest fighting game-inspired combos that can turn your undead, often skeletal enemies into piles of bones. You'll learn moves mostly identical to those you found in the first game, taught in a well-timed cadence that allows you to learn the ins and outs of a move before piling on the next. So when you learn how to use your uppercut, for instance, you'll get ample opportunity to turn that move loose on enemies, learn how to use it to aid your platforming and more, before the next move is placed on top of it. Then you'll learn how to use that next move just as you did the last, but you'll also be able to put those moves together. The end result, by the time you learn all of the game's techniques, whether attacks or throws or blocks or whatever else, can only be described as symphonic. Whoever designed Guacamelee 2's combat deserves a raise. Stringing attacks together and figuring out new ways to hurt and destroy your enemies is the absolute epitome of satisfying. Guacamelee 2 is a game that begs to be played with style. Many games that attempt a similar gameplay tact often come off as button mashy and one-dimensional, particularly if you don't have to use most of or even any of said game's special moves. But Guacamelee 2 forces your hand by making mandatory all of the moves, not only in combat, but in navigating the game's interconnected regions. It allows players to gradually adjust to what is a fairly complex control scheme that can be daunting at first, but one that becomes second nature by the time you're in the last third of the game. When you throw on top of the move list the ability to quickly jet through dimensions as you play by using the triggers on your controller, and even to turn into a chicken to unleash the dreaded Pollo power, you have a move list and control scheme that's outright daunting on paper, but one that you will barely give a second thought to as you play, simply because Guacamelee 2's design so nicely places layer upon layer without you even noticing. Like any Metroidvania, Guacamelee 2 stresses backtracking, discovering and rediscovering old dormant areas of already explored regions, and using your moves to destroy color-coded blocks and barriers throughout the adventure to access new, sometimes secret areas. Indeed, the secrets and optional content run deep here. I beat the game in about 10 hours with 58% of the overall map completed, before jumping into a hard difficulty playthrough that can only be unlocked by beating the game once through. So while the adventure is a tad short, as I noted above, it can be easily extended to a far greater length by being thorough, by finding every hidden money-filled treasure chest, by uncovering all of the health and stamina upgrades stashed in every corner of the map, and more. You can even find exceptionally well-hidden and difficult to acquire items that, in turn, can unlock a secret ending. The level of control you have over making wands stronger is a nice touch too, especially because at normal difficulty, Guacamelee 2 just isn't very hard. All of that money you find in the environment and earn from defeating enemies can be used to unlock upgrades in one of 5 verticals, each associated with a special moveset. So while there isn't statistical depth or item, weapon, and armor equipping in Guacamelee 2 like there is in many other Metroidvanias, there's still customization options galore to complement your adventure. You can make the game harder by ignoring upgrades, or better yet, just playing a second playthrough on hard. There's no doubt that 2018 is far different from 2013 when it comes to the availability of quality, independent developed downloadable titles. So there's no question that Guacamelee 2 is entering a far more saturated market than the original did 5 years ago, and it's simply not going to pop like its predecessor. But that's a sign of the times and not a mark against the game itself. Guacamelee 2 is just as strong, and in some ways even stronger than the original. Yes, it relies on its old graphical and sonic flair, but that doesn't make it any less beautiful to look at and listen to. Yes, it feels and plays a great deal like the original, but that doesn't mean such conventions don't best serve the game, because they do. And yes, DrinkBox might have been wise to deliver this game in, say, 2015 or 2016 to better capitalize on the original, but that's crying over spilled milk at this point. The fact is, we finally have our Guacamelee sequel, and it's awesome. It's one of the funnest experiences I've had in 2018 so far, and I highly recommend it to fans of the original, to Metroidvania fiends like myself, and to those that love a meaty, well-crafted, and incredibly fun 2D side-scroller. Guacamelee 2 is the perfect weekend game. Download it on a Friday night, play it into Saturday, and by Sunday afternoon, you'll be done. That's $20 very well spent, if I do say so myself.